How has the nature of experimentation and innovation evolved as the industry itself has evolved and become more competitive?
Great. I think the entire process of experimentation has kept pace or probably also led the technology evolution that's happened generally as a country, but a lot more as in the startup ecosystem for our country. Uh, when I look at 6, 7 years back, a lot of experimentation was field oriented. A lot of experimentation was on the ground. For example, um, one of the experiments that a lot of companies did back then is that should I actually have, instead of going full gig, which means everyone can log in from wherever they like and whenever they like, should I actually go ahead and create localized hubs, for example? So a lot of the experimentation that was there was around how do I make um, uh, how do I make the movement of gig workers more streamlined by interventions on the ground? Slowly, folks realize that one, not only this is um, high cost, but also not very scalable. Because initially, the assumption was that the gig economy demand is only in the top 10 cities, and hence a lot of this was making sense. But what about the next 100 cities? What about the next 500 or the next 1,000 cities? Will this model continue to work? The answer inevitably was that it won't. And hence, a lot of experimentation started moving towards technology. And I think a lot of that happened also because the overall adoption of technology itself had increased, the comfort on technology had increased, and so on and so forth. Right. Uh, so that's where the direction has moved. Um, so that's one of the things. The second thing that's happened as a part of that itself is experimentation, not only in terms of how do I make the workers or gig workers' life slightly more streamlined, to saying that how can we actually make the life of a gig worker actually more enriched, right? Which means a lot of focus started, again, a lot of that has been product and technology led, is how do I provide all the necessary information to a gig worker to for him or her to make the right choice in terms of time versus money. So let me give you an small example of that. If I'm a food delivery worker and I choose to work between 3 to 7 p.m., now that's not when the maximum number of orders are coming. The maximum number of orders are coming between 7 to 11 p.m., for example. The availability of this information itself was very powerful for a gig worker to make that conscious choice that do I want to work from 3 to 7 or I want to work from 7 to 11. So a lot of the experimentation started moving in terms of providing information along with the right triggers, and that too on a friendly product for gig workers to be able to make easy choices so that their overall quality of life improves substantially. And that's been a large area of focus in the last couple of years. Ever since, as I said, at the onset of pandemic, this became a phenomena in itself. The mode of experimentation has actually evolved as well within the product as well, right? So it initially started with more training based. Um, Gig workers would be trained on a lot of things. How do you handle pizza better? How do you talk to your passengers better? And so on and so forth. The second stage beyond training was training plus incentivization. That was the second level where a lot of experimentation was happening. That if I incentivize the right behavior, will it change the behavior fundamentally? Over a period, people realized that that also has a law of returns to scale. Um, and hence, the third stage now is about um, a lot of co-selection. Right now, you see gig workers rating riders and riders or passengers, and passengers also rating gig workers back. So it has now become a lot more about co-selection, which means the experiment platform is sort of normalized to say that we will provide all the right set of inputs for both the set of parties to make the right choice. And I think that's a good level where both the parties have, I would say, the necessary information to be able to take the right calls for themselves.
Notice that initial experimentation was on the supply side of the product. Experimentation now appears to have moved towards standardization to enable scale up. And the idea of innovation is also to augment supply by providing more information to the suppliers to enable the platform to cater to idiosyncratic time-varying demand, right? Unexpected demand surges and so on and so forth. Building legitimacy on the demand side through training that enables gig workers to respond better to their customer needs seems like a big innovation that this company seems to be, or this industry seems to be up to. Here's another question for you. I hope you know what dominant design is all about. I'm sure you know what dominant design is about. This is the set of standards that an industry participant mostly conforms to. Has the industry that you're talking about, right, the platform-based gig economy industry, reached the dominant design stage?
I think we are still far from that, Anand. We are still in very early stages of this. It There are a lot of societal constructs that the gig economy needs to first solve. There are a lot of other barriers, either societal, emotional, or financial, that the gig economy needs to answer very, very well for this to reach a stage where we would say, okay, these are the two models that we know that largely work. Um, the fundamental force driving this model right now is, as I said before, is that how do we make this entire model about self-selection? And how do we make sure that all gig workers have the best possible information to be able to make their choice? That's the so-called dominant model right now, but is that a model that we think is the best answer possible? I think we are at least a couple of years behind.
So this industry seems like removing information asymmetry is still work in progress. So it is establishing the legitimacy of the platform both on the demand and the supply side still seems to be an ongoing activity. Mr. Rakesh, the reason I had asked you about dominant design is that I read and hear that the industry on its way towards consolidation. And this talk is also interspersed with different kinds of innovation that might be at play, which might broadly be defined as product innovation. For example, the focus on cloud kitchens. Is product innovation more dominant in this industry at the moment relative to process innovation? How do you see these two different kinds of innovation in the industry at the moment?
I think we live in a fairly complex world. Um, the information availability has made it um, almost everyone's prerogative to try and get the best answer out given a set of inputs. And because of that, I think both process as well as product based innovations are almost going hand in hand. What we as consumers see is more product based innovation because that's in the front end. We get to see that. Process based innovations actually happen a lot, but we might not see that. Let me give you an example, right? For example, Cloud Kitchen, although it's a new service delivery model, can be perceived as a product based innovation. But what really goes behind when a cloud kitchen opens, right? It's a restaurant at the end of the day. It doesn't serve food to dine-in customers, but it makes food, it buys food, it converts raw materials into food. Um, and there are people or automated machines which are cooking it and so on and so forth. But eventually what comes out is the same food that you would have eaten from another restaurant. But what changes behind this is the way in which you operate this restaurant, right? Um, the processes on which you are more focused on this restaurant versus some other restaurant, right? So, for example, for a cloud kitchen to do well, um, which is going to be all 100% delivery business, their focus on packaging as a source of differentiation for their product end experience is very, very high. Because if you don't package your products well, then it won't reach the customers in the right shape and form, and they don't get the same utility that they would have gotten from the food otherwise. Versus when you open a restaurant which has a mix of delivery and dine-in, packaging may not be something that you might focus on quite a bit. Um, so when we look at Cloud Kitchen as a whole product, we might see this as a delivery-only kitchen, which has, let's say, fundamentally transformed the way the restaurant industry is operating in India. But behind that are a lot of process innovations, packaging here, for example, or some other things, which has actually backed this product change. So I think this duality is to coexist. This duality is not necessarily orthogonal to each other. They are more, you know, they are a y equal to x line, if I can say that in some way, right, on the first quadrant. So they coexist together. Um, and that will continue to be the case. For example, now cloud kitchens are thinking about how do I launch more brands from the same kitchen space. Um, Now, again, for a customer, that might come out as a product, but for the cloud kitchen, it's actually a fundamental process change in the way they operate their kitchen right now.
Right, once again, we spoke about this idea of continuous innovation. Notice the coexistence of product and process innovation. And Mr. Rakesh's answer points to somewhat of a continuous innovation model. So how do we bring it back to theory? Right, so let me talk about how do we bring it back to the three theories that we've essentially spoken about in the context of industry evolution. Let's first focus on what might be the source of competitive advantage in this industry. To me, it seems like it is the ability to respond to frequent demand surges that essentially is the source of competitive advantage in the industry. This, in all probability, defines the success of the industry participants. And in order to be able to do that, the platform has to have workers on the supply side who will also work when the demand is high and vice versa. Right? So this is the idea of flexibility, the flexibility that a gig economy essentially provides. Right? So this flexibility is also crucial for, let's say, a company in this industry to attend or to cater to some of these frequent demand surges. For that, information about pricing, for example, surge pricing mechanisms, which provides greater incentives to the participants on the supply side, should be incredibly important, right? Which is once again the reason why Mr. Rakesh keeps emphasizing on two things, right? One is this idea of information asymmetry. Second is this idea of how do I incentivize participants to become a part of the platform. So which theories might be at play? Right? The instance of the food delivery industry clearly rules out, at least in my opinion, the two theories that we spoke about, the innovation gamble kind of a model which extends this idea of creative destruction, and the idea or the theory that is based on this idea of dominant design. Why? Because of three reasons. Right? First, the demand curve does not appear to be fixed. It's not like the demand curve is fixed and does not vary over time. At least in the case of the online or the platform-based food delivery model, as the product itself gains acceptance, right, the demand curve appears to be shifting towards the right, and it also appears to be increasing the prices and maybe the quantity consumed as well. The second one, which strongly points in favor of the continuous improvement model, is essentially this coexistence of product and process innovation. Right? With this essentially points towards maybe the continuous innovation model being a better candidate for explaining some of the patterns in this industry. The third one, as we briefly spoke about, is the entry patterns based on anticipated demand. Right? So firms are entering in the hope that they would be able to recoup some of their costs, their upfront costs that they are incurring on the platform, on the technology front, as well as in terms of recruiting the members on the platform through advertising and so on and so forth. So entry in anticipation of demand rather than full information of the demand also once again points to the continuous innovation model, right? So it not only, so some of the facts that Mr. Rakesh brought to the table not only rules out the first two theories, but it also strongly points us towards the existence of, or maybe the existence of the continuous innovation model that might be at play in this market. That said, there are obviously open questions as well. For example, is there a connection between quantity sold and the extent to which the quantity sold might bias innovations toward process innovations? This is not something that came up from Mr. Rakesh's answers as well, because he said that, look, there is still this ongoing process of a very healthy interplay between process and product innovation, and it might be too early for us to think about whether the industry itself is biased in favor of process innovation. He simply said that both of this is sort of coexist with each other at this point. Has the industry reached that scale, so much so that process innovation essentially starts to dominate product innovation? It does not appear to be the case. And maybe the third one is, do regional differences limit the extent to which scale might incentivize process innovation, right? There was this big trade-off that came up in Mr. Rakesh's answers between the extent of customization and modularity, right? In his words, modularity, right? And because of this trade-off, there might be limits to the extent to which the large quantities that these platforms might be able to cater to itself acts as an incentive for process innovations. What created sales takeoff in this industry, right? It appears it is essentially the legitimacy on the demand side, right? So Mr. Rakesh essentially spoke about the advent of broadband, for example, because of which people were able to access information, which was a stepping stone to establishing the legitimacy on the demand side, because people could simply access this. But that also required legitimacy to build legitimacy on the demand side. And Mr. Rakesh essentially spoke about the role of advertising in order to be able to attract enough customers on the demand side as well. He also spoke about onboarding and maintaining a labor force that would respond to the frequent demand surges as well. And this, like we spoke about, might be the crucial factor that determines the competitive advantage in this industry. That is, what do I mean is that it is just not about managing the demand side. It's about also managing the supply side, so much so that supply can be augmented in response to the demand that appears to be crucial for the incumbents of this industry. What might create shakeout? So from Mr. Rakesh's answers, it doesn't seem like the industry has reached a point in which it will essentially shake out. In fact, Mr. Rakesh actually talks about that it's too early even to think about it. But let's sort of extrapolate from this model, given that it seems like somewhat the continuous innovation model seems to be at play in this industry. It might be eventually the advent of process efficiencies, but that does not seem to be the case maybe in the near future. It might happen in the distant future. But the industry does not seem to have reached that point just as yet, and we might have to wait for that to happen. But as a result of which, the acquisitions that we see in this industry will likely to be in order to enter new submarkets or to spread this fixed cost over a larger volume, right? So the standard idea behind acquisitions, synergies, right? Synergies, the latter point, which is about spreading fixed costs over a larger volume, might just be synergistic acquisitions, or they could be acquisitions in an effort to enter new submarkets as well. And acquisitions might also happen in order to acquire gig workers to be able to better cater to the sudden demand fluctuations as well. And from what we gather, my sense is that we may not have reached a point, the tipping point in which shakeout is going to happen based on process innovations or efficiencies itself. Customers will continue to pick platforms based on product features rather than costs, and this is what we increasingly see these days as well, and that trend will likely continue. And until the point wherein customers start to worry about efficiencies or cost, right, we will see innovations that are happening in this industry that are mostly of the product variety. Thanks for watching. I hope I was able to connect the theory to how the food services industry itself has evolved over a period of time. See you next time with another episode of Interventions.